Today's lesson is Point Nemo, the true middle of nowhere. Hi, everybody. I'm Roger.
And I'm Mike.
And today we're going to talk about something called Point Nemo. Here, Nemo is not referring to that little clownfish that starred in a Pixar movie or even a second Pixar movie many years ago. In this particular case, we're talking about a place in the world that is farthest from any land and any person, and you don't want to go there or else you're in big trouble.
Absolutely. If you look up Point Nemo on a GPS, Google Earth, something like that, you will find it really in the middle, literally, of nowhere. It's slap bang in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and it's an interesting place because it is the furthest place from anywhere else, I guess is the best way to describe it. There's no one there. No one lives there permanently. And it's kind of interesting how someone discovered this place on Earth that is so far away from other people, other points of land. Your closest neighbors are actually in space. Yeah, that's what we're talking about. It's really far from everywhere.
Well, the International Space Station passes over there. It's not always there.
Not
but
always.
At one point, at some point, the closest people to this point are in the International Space Station. But we'll find out about that as our lesson continues. So let's begin by listening to the first part right now.
Point Nemo, the true middle of nowhere. Our planet is home to a population of 8 billion people. We've conquered its highest mountains, explored the depths of its oceans, and even set foot on its moon. However, there's one place on Earth where humans have likely never been.
大家好，第一部分我们来介绍动词 conquer， 它的意思是征服、占领或是克服。例如The king wanted to conquer the country next to his, but it had a large army. 那位国王想要征服他邻国，但是对方军事很强大。又或者说 I still haven't conquered my fear of spiders. 我还是没办法克服对蜘蛛的恐惧。
Okay, we should check out our title a little more carefully. We have a new word in there. Point Nemo, it says. That's the name of the place, Point Nemo. That's what you would type in if you're looking to find it on Google Earth. It's the true middle of nowhere. If someone says, I'm in the middle of nowhere, that means they feel like they're really far from any other humans, any other civilization, any other, cities, towns, buildings, places, things like that. Nowhere is basically a place that doesn't exist. I am nowhere. I don't know where I am. So it's kind of a word that we would use to describe a complete lack of knowledge or information about a location, about a place. Where is it on a map? So you're in the middle of nowhere. You're in the middle of space. You're so far away from other people is what we're saying here. Our planet, the article begins, is home to a population of 8 billion people. Yes, most of us are aware of this. There are a lot of people on our floating blue orb in space. 8 billion. That's a very large number, and it's getting larger. We've conquered its highest mountains, explored the depths of its oceans, and even set foot on its moon. Yeah, that's pretty much true. In the last few years, there's probably fewer and fewer places that humans haven't been or photographed or traveled through or something like that. So we've conquered the highest mountains, Mount Everest, back in the 1950s. We explored the depths of the oceans down to the Challenger Deep, and even set foot on its moon, of course, in 1969. So basically, humans have been just about anywhere we can imagine, even off the planet. So we've conquered all of these places. To conquer, we often use it in a sort of military idea. Attacking another country and beating their army and taking over their land is conquering that land. But here, we're using it more as a challenge. We're looking at a really difficult challenge, and if you succeed, if you reach the top of the mountain or travel that far distance in space, you have conquered the challenge. You have beaten the challenge. You have won through in a difficult situation. However...
Yes, indeed. However, there's one place on Earth where humans have likely never been. It is indeed in the middle of nowhere, and that's called Point Nemo. Let's find out some more in the second part of our lesson.
Known as Point Nemo, it's the remotest place on the planet. And even Hervala Lukatella, the man who identified it, has never visited there. In 1992, Lukatella made use of special software to determine the site farthest away from any land and found its exact position to be in the South Pacific Ocean. One would have to travel 1,670 miles from Point Nemo to reach the nearest island, and the people closest to the point are actually in the International Space Station, ISS, passing 258 miles overhead. Indeed, there's almost no life at all in the area because a sea current causes nutrient-rich water to flow away from it. Only a small number of bacteria and crabs survive there, living around volcanic vents in the sea floor. Considering the loneliness of the location, the name Nemo, which is Latin for no one, seems perfectly fitting.
第二部分我们看到片语 make use of something 指的是使用点点点或是利用点点点。例如 As a sales representative, Josie often needs to make use of her communication skills. 身为一位业务代表 Josie 常需要使用她的沟通技能。或者 Instead of playing video games all day long, you should make better use of your time. 你应该更加善用时间，而不是整天打电动。接下来介绍 overhead 这个副词的意思是在空中或是在头顶上。例如 I watched as hundreds of birds flew overhead. 我看到数百只鸟从空中飞过。或是 The crowd waved as the hot air balloon floated overhead. 群众在热气球飘过他们的头顶时向他挥手。再来是名词 vent 表示火山口，但也可以是液体、气体的出口或是通风口。可以说We had an amazing photo of the volcanic vent by using the drone. 透过无人机，我们拍摄到火山口周围的惊人景色。又或者说 Excess hot air is released through these vents. 多余的热空气是经由这些排气口排出。
Okay, so again, this is a place in the world where people have likely never been, and known as Point Nemo. It's the remotest place on the planet, and even All+互動, the man who identified it, has never visited there. So again, this is known as Point Nemo. That's what we call it, and it's remote, which means it's far away from anything else. And this guy, All+互動, he identified this place, and he hasn't even been there before. So if you identify something, you recognize it, you give it a name, you basically let people know of its existence.
How did he do this? Well, it's kind of interesting. In 1992, Lucatella made use of special software to determine the site farthest away from any land and found its exact position to be in the South Pacific Ocean. So this guy is obviously interested in maps or geography, sort of laying out the world and understanding where things are and stuff. And he used some kind of special computer program or special software to find out this information. To make use of something is basically to use something to make it work for you in some kind of way. You might make use of a car to get to work. You might make use of a lot of special equipment in your kitchen to prepare fabulous meals. And you can make use of information as well. It's not just things. Basically, you're just using things to reach a goal. So he used special software, a computer program, to determine the site farthest away. To determine something, sometimes when we use determine, it's like I'm determined to get this job. I'm not going to let anything stop me. I am going to do it, and I will not fail. But here we're using it in a different way. Here it's to find out something, to really get the facts and make sure your facts are correct. So if you don't know your friend's phone number, rather than just taking a guess, you might look it up online or look it up on their Facebook or something to determine their phone number. People often use Google Maps or GPS to find out exactly where they're going. Not just, I think it's around this place, we'll drive over there and then we'll find it eventually. No, if you really want to be safe, if you don't want to waste time, you might use GPS to determine or find out exactly where something is. So he found out exactly the site or the place farthest from any land and found its exact position, found that place to be in the South Pacific. Yeah, if you ever look at a map, the Pacific Ocean is big. The South Pacific Ocean, basically kind of between Australia and the western eastern coast of South America is really, really big. That's a lot of water.
Right, so I used special software to determine this, to figure out where the farthest point away from land is. And again, it's in the South Pacific Ocean. One or a person would have to travel 1,670 miles from Point Nemo to reach the nearest island. And the people closest to the point are actually in the International Space Station, also known as ISS, passing 258 miles overhead. So again, at a certain point in time, of course, the International Space Station is moving. It's orbiting the Earth, so it's not always there. But at one point in its orbit, it will be closer to that point than any other person on the face of the Earth.
That is absolutely crazy. That's a much shorter distance to go when you run out of sugar or salt or something. You know, if you're going to your nearest neighbors, it would be much easier to take that rocket and fly overhead, fly to the space station, which, as Roger said, is overhead sometimes because, of course, it's flying and spinning around the Earth all the time. But if something is overhead, it's above you. That's all. What is overhead when you go outside? The sky, the clouds, birds, possibly an airplane maybe flying overhead, something like that. So it just means it's up above you, either outside the sky, or if you're inside, lights would be overhead or the ceiling would be overhead. It's literally over your head.
Right. Sometimes when I'm at home, I hear these bird calls from the sky and I realize, oh, the eagles are flying overhead. There they are up in the sky. So yes, indeed, this does happen. Sometimes the ISS sometimes flies over this point, but again, nobody's there. It's just a point in the ocean. There's no island there. And so, of course, no one really wants to go there unless you want to go there to say you've been there. And here in the next paragraph, it says, indeed, there's almost no life at all in the area because a sea current causes nutrient-rich water to flow away from it. So we're talking about in the ocean there. There's almost no life at all in the area or in the ocean there because it has this sea current, which is when the water moves in certain patterns in the ocean. And, of course, we've got nutrient-rich water there, but it flows away from this particular point. A nutrient is some kind of material, some kind of substance that provides nourishment for a living thing. It could be vitamins, minerals, proteins, stuff like that. Those are examples of nutrients. But here, in this case, the nutrients flow away from this particular point, so there isn't much life there.
Interesting. So not a great place for fishing, apparently. So what would you find there? There must be some living things there. Well, yes, there are. And they're probably far below you, way down underwater. Only a small number of bacteria and crabs survive there. Wow. Not even any little fish at all. These animals, these creatures, these bacteria and crabs, they are living around volcanic vents in the sea floor. So this is not a coral reef filled with lots of life or anything like that. It's very lifeless. Bacteria, very small, simple living organisms, so small we can't see them. When we think of bacteria, we think of things that might make us sick if they get in our body, or little things that we can't see on our hands from someone who might have a disease or a sickness. You wash the bacteria off. So very small, simple living creatures, and a few crabs. So slightly more complex, larger creature, but still not exactly sharks and whales and dolphins or things like that. And these animals are living around volcanic vents in the sea floor. As we mentioned, very few nutrients, not a lot of tasty fish nearby to feed on. So they have to get their nutrients, minerals and whatnot, from volcanic vents in the sea floor. It really is almost like an alien planet here. A vent is a space where air, gas, water, something like that might escape. If you think of the sort of space at the top of your tea kettle or a pot where steam might come out, that might be a vent, in the same way that a fan above your stove might be a vent to get gas and smells and smoke out of your kitchen. And this is a volcanic vent, so it's near a volcano, or it's basically one of those areas of the Earth's surface that's thinner than others, and a lot of lava and volcanic activity happens there. It might be like a hot spring kind of geyser area if it's the surface of the Earth, but deep down below the water in the oceans, in places like Hawaii and other places, they have volcanic activity, and this volcanic activity on the sea floor can actually support life in a way that is quite surprising to scientists, but not a lot of neighbors around Point Nemo.
Right, so here in the next sentence it says, considering the loneliness of the location or the isolation of this place, The name Nemo, which is Latin for no one, seems perfectly fitting. It is an appropriate name for this place, Nemo, because it comes from Latin and it means no one. No one is there. Okay, so it is very remote. It is far away from any place else on the face of the earth. And we'll move on now to the third and final part of our lesson, and we'll wrap things up.
Because it's so remote, Point Nemo is used as a graveyard for obsolete spacecraft. In fact, it's NASA's favored resting place for the ISS after its planned retirement in 2031.
第三部分看到名词 graveyard， 指的是墓地或是坟场。举例来说 Despite being afraid of ghosts, Tammy bravely walked through the graveyard at night. 尽管怕鬼 Tammy 还是勇敢地在晚上穿过墓地。也可以说 Nina goes to the family graveyard every year on tomb sweeping day. Nina 每年都会在清明节去家族墓园。下一个看到 spacecraft， 它是名词，意思是太空船。例如 To design a proper spacecraft, the engineers knew they had to keep its weight to a minimum. 为了设计出合适的太空船，工程师知道他们必须将其重量保持在最低限度。或是 When Sean was little, he dreamed about navigating a spacecraft to the moon. Sean 在小时候梦想驾驶太空船前往月球。最后我们看到 retirement， 这个名词指的是退役或是退休。我们可以说 The police dog was adopted by an officer after its retirement. 那只警犬在退役后被一位警官收养。最后一个例子 Alvin thought he would enjoy retirement, but he actually found it quite boring. Alvin 以为他会很享受退休生活，结果他却感到无聊。
Okay, so here it says in the third part, because it's so remote, Point Nemo is used as a graveyard for obsolete spacecraft. Okay, a graveyard, of course, is a place where you put dead people. Usually a graveyard is associated with a church. Some churches have their own graveyards where they bury the dead. People who used to attend the church are buried there. Whereas a cemetery is usually for the public. Here in Taiwan, of course, you've got lots of cemeteries on mountains. But if it's associated with a church, then it's probably going to be a graveyard, although sometimes the terms are interchangeable.
So they use it as a graveyard, a place to get rid of not dead bodies, but dead spacecraft, I guess you could say, although they're more properly described as obsolete spacecraft. So spacecraft, things that go into space. And of course, rocket ships carrying astronauts to the moon, or the space shuttle Dragon X, one of Elon Musk's rockets. Those would be spacecraft that carry people, but we also would include satellites in there, you know, satellites that gather information, or GPS, or have cameras on them, collect data in space, this type of thing, communication satellites as well. And often these satellites have sort of a lifespan. They're machines, they're made at a certain time, and after 10 or 20 years, they're not much use anymore. Science has changed, the machines have worn out, and so they have to do something with them. These spacecraft can't just sort of fly around the Earth all the time forever. They might crash into other things and cause all sorts of problems and danger. So once they are obsolete, once they are no longer usable or technically viable, they have to get rid of them. Obsolete is basically a machine that has seen better days. It's no longer useful. It might be out of date. If you're trying to run an old computer with Windows 95 and you're having problems with your YouTube connection, well, maybe because your computer and the software is very obsolete. It's out of date. It's sort of past its useful life. So what they do is they basically crash these satellites. They tell them to fly down into the Earth, into the atmosphere. Of course, a lot of them burn up, but some pieces of these satellites, which can still be large, heavy, several tons of burning metal, and they don't want that to land on people or be near a city, so they send it right there into the middle of the Pacific Ocean near Point Nemo. It's the graveyard for these spacecraft to go and, well, be buried, I guess we could say.
Indeed, under the water. Spacecraft here is a general term for anything that's flying in space that people people are traveling around in, maybe like the Apollo lunar module or something like that. That's an example of obsolete spacecraft. It's not used anymore. They're going to probably try to bring this ISS down into the ocean, and it will sink there and it will stay there for the rest of eternity. And in fact, it's NASA's favored resting place for the ISS after its planned retirement in 2031. So your resting place usually refers to your grave, where you're going to be buried when you're dead. A retirement just refers to the period of time in which you are no longer working. Lots of people, of course, are worried about their retirement. Can I save enough money for retirement? Maybe I don't have enough, so I have to keep working all the way until the age of 70. Who knows? Okay, we're at the end of our lesson for today. Let's listen now to Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们今天要练习克漏字的题型，那来看看文章的5个题目咯。第一题是 We've conquered its highest mountains, explored the depth of its oceans, and even 空格 its moon。 题目意思是我们征服了最高的山脉，探索了海洋的深处，甚至还空格它的卫星，也就是月球。那这边是考我们动词片语，我们来看选项 A took control of 是表达控制什么，支配什么。 B set foot on 表示踏上什么什么。 C had an eye for 是表达对什么具有鉴赏眼光，具有识别什么的价值的能力。那么 D gave way to 表示被什么取代。从语义上来看，应该是要表达踏上月球嘛，所以最适合答案是 B set foot on。 我们来看第二题是 In 1992, Lucatella made use of special software to 空格 the site farthest away from any land and found its exact position to be in the South Pacific Ocean。 题目意思是1992年卢卡特拉利用特殊软体空格距离陆地最远的地点，并发现其确切位置位于南太平洋。这题是在考我们字汇，空格里面是要填入有及物用法的动词。来看选项 A install 是安装，像安装电脑程式，它也有设置的意思。 B reserve表示预约保留，或者是把什么专门留给。 C oppose 表示反对反抗。 D determine 表示确定测定。从语义上来看，它应该是要表达卢卡特拉利用特殊软体来确定距离陆地最远的地点，确定它的位置，所以最适合答案是 D determine。 第三题是The people closest to the point are actually in the International Space Station ISS空格 258 miles overhead。 题目意思是距离这个点最近的人实际上是在上方距离258英里的国际太空站上。题目4个选项是 pass 的不同变化， A passing, B have passed, C to pass, D passed。 那我们从句子结构来看，空格所在的子句它有了主词 the people closest to the point， 它有动词 are， 还有主词补语 in the International Space Station。 那可以推断说空格到后面这个258 miles overhead 这段是用来修饰 ISS， 也就是这个国际太空站。那如果我们用关系子句要修饰的话，会写作 which passes 或者是 that passes 258 miles overhead。 那现在我们可以省略掉 which 或是 that， 然后把动词 passes 改成现在分词 passing，那也可以简化成这样的方式来形容先行词，所以正确答案就选 A passing。第4题是空格 There's almost no life at all in the area because a sea current causes nutrient-rich water to flow away from it。 题目意思是空格逗号该地区几乎没有生命存在，因为海流导致富含营养的水流走。这题考我们副词，来看选项 A in short 表示简言之， B nevertheless 表示尽管如此然而， C indeed表示确实的确， D as a result 表示因此。那空格前面提到说距离尼莫点最近的人是在上空距离258英里的国际太空站上，而空格后面提到说因为海流导致富含营养的水流离该地区，以至于几乎没有生命存在，所以我们判断空格应该是填入能够进一步说明来强调尼莫点的荒凉和偏远情况的副词，所以最适合答案会是 C indeed。 第5题是 空格 the loneliness of the location. The name Nemo, which is Latin for no one, seems perfectly fitting. 题目意思是空格这个地点的孤立，尼莫这个名字在拉丁语中是没有人的意思，那这个名字似乎非常适合。那这题考我们介系词，我们来看看选项 A concerning 它是介系词，表示关于。那么 B considering 它可以当介系词或连接词，表示考虑到什么什么就什么什么而言。C supposing 它是当连接词，表示假如如果。D providing 它是连接词，表示在什么条件下只要怎么样就能怎么样。那四个选项当中 C supposing 和 D providing 是连接词，所以不能选。那从语义上来看，应该是要表达考虑到这个地点的孤立，尼莫这个名字似乎非常合适。好，那这题答案就是要选 B considering。那么以上是今天的讲解，我们来回顾今天的单字吧。
Nowhere. Lost in the dense forest, the explorers felt as if they were in the middle of nowhere. Conquer. Kenny has been training for months in order to conquer the summit of Canada's highest mountain. Identify. Through careful analysis, researchers can accurately identify unknown species. Overhead. As the fireworks exploded overhead, the crowd in the park cheered. Nutrient. Vegetables are rich in the nutrients needed for good health. Spacecraft. The spacecraft successfully completed its mission to explore the moons of Jupiter. Retirement. Although she's worked hard for decades, Emma isn't looking forward to retirement.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Mike.
I am Roger. See you next time.